It doesn't happen in a moment. There is no warning sign, no loud collapse, no clear beginning. One day you simply wake up and move. You move through the same routine, the same morning, the same habits. Nothing feels broken. Nothing feels urgent. And because nothing hurts enough to demand attention, you don't stop to question it. This is how the drift begins. Not with failure, not with pain, but with silence. A quiet shift you don't notice until you're already far from where you meant to go. At first, you tell yourself you're just tired. Everyone gets tired. Life is busy. Life is heavy. So you rest. You slow down. But the feeling doesn't leave. It settles. And slowly, you stop listening to the part of you that asks questions. The part that once wondered, is this the life I want? That voice doesn't disappear. It just grows quieter. Until one day, you can't remember the last time you've heard it clearly. You still function. You still show up. Still reply to messages. Still smile when it's expected. From the outside, everything looks fine. But inside, something has shifted. You don't feel lost. You feel distant. Like you're watching your life from a few steps behind. Present, but not fully here. You go through days without noticing them pass. Weeks blur together. And time begins to move faster than your awareness. There was a time when your days felt heavier. Not because they were harder, but because they mattered. Choices felt meaningful. Decisions carried weight. Now, everything feels neutral. Not bad. Not good. Just repetitive. You don't feel excitement. But you don't feel panic either. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because panic makes people stop. Neutrality makes people drift. Drifting doesn't announce itself. It blends into your routine. It hides inside comfort. Inside familiarity. Inside, you'll figure it out later. But later never comes. It just keeps moving further away. And the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to remember what you were waiting for in the first place. If you're listening to this right now, there's a reason. Something in you recognized these words. Not because you failed. Not because you're broken. But because somewhere along the way, you stopped steering. And your life continued without direction. This is not the end of your story. But it is the moment where awareness begins. And awareness changes everything. Drifting doesn't pull you away from life. It pulls you away from yourself. You still wake up where you're supposed to. Still go where you're expected to go. Still do what needs to be done. From the outside, nothing has changed. But inside, there's distance now. A space between what you do and what you feel. A quiet gap that keeps growing. Even though no one notices it. You remember a time when you felt more present. When you noticed how days passed. When moments stayed with you longer. Back then, your thoughts felt connected to your actions. Now they feel separate. You do things because it's time to do them. Not because they mean something. And the strange part is, you don't feel pain about it. You feel numb. Numbness is easy to live with. It doesn't interrupt your schedule. It doesn't ask questions. It doesn't demand change. When people talk about being lost, they imagine chaos, missed turns, bad decisions, everything falling apart. But drifting is quieter than that. Drifting looks like stability. It looks like responsibility. It looks like doing what you're supposed to do, while slowly forgetting why you started in the first place. You're not lost. You're disconnected. And disconnection is harder to recognize because it doesn't hurt loudly. You stop asking yourself real questions, not because you don't care, but because the answers feel inconvenient. Questions like, is this what I want? Is this who I'm becoming? Is this enough for me? So you replace them with easier ones. What's next? What needs to be done today? How do I get through this week? And slowly, direction is replaced with momentum. Momentum is powerful. It carries you forward without effort. But momentum doesn't care where you end up. It only cares that you keep moving. So you keep going. Day after day. Task after task. Not because you chose this path, but because stopping would mean noticing how far you've drifted. And then something strange happens. You start to feel tired. Not in your body, but in your direction. You're not exhausted from effort. You're exhausted from moving without meaning, from carrying a life that no longer feels connected to who you are. Most people don't recognize this feeling right away. They live with it for years, until one quiet moment forces them to notice. At some point you stop choosing, not because you decided to, but because choosing started to feel unnecessary. You wake up and follow momentum. The day moves you forward. Before you even realize you're awake. Habits decide your mornings. Schedules decide your time. Expectations decide your energy. You don't resist it. Autopilot feels efficient. It feels responsible. It feels safe. On autopilot, you don't ask where you're going. You focus on getting through. Through the day. Through the week. Through whatever comes next. You tell yourself you'll slow down later. That when things settle, you'll think more deeply about your life. But things never settle. They just replace themselves. One obligation becomes another, and another. Autopilot has a rhythm. Wake up. React. Respond. Repeat. There's no space to reflect. No room to feel. And slowly, you stop noticing how much of your life is being lived automatically. You scroll when you're tired. You consume when you're bored. You distract when silence gets uncomfortable. Not because it makes you happy, but because it fills the space. Distractions start to feel necessary. They keep you from thinking too much. They soften the moments where awareness tries to break through. Late at night, when the noise finally fades, that's when it shows up. A quiet thought. A question you didn't invite. Is this really my life? You don't chase the thought. You push it away. Tomorrow is waiting. You tell yourself this is just how adulthood feels. That everyone lives like this. Busy. Preoccupied. Always catching up. And maybe that's true. But that doesn't mean it's harmless. Because autopilot doesn't just carry you forward. It slowly teaches you to stop caring where you're headed. The strange thing is, you don't feel miserable. You feel muted. Like life is happening through a filter. Muted joy. Muted sadness. Muted purpose. And deep down, you know something is missing. Not something outside of you. Something internal. Something you once had access to. And that awareness is trying to wake you up. This is the part that's hardest to explain. Because nothing is obviously wrong. Your life looks stable. Functional. Acceptable. You're doing what you're supposed to do. So when the heaviness appears, you don't know what to call it. It's not sadness. At least not the kind people recognize. It's quieter than that. It shows up in small moments. When you sit alone longer than usual. When you finish a day and feel nothing about it. When achievements don't land the way you thought they would. You tell yourself you should be grateful. And you are. But gratitude doesn't remove the weight. It just makes you feel guilty for carrying it. So you keep it to yourself. This feeling doesn't ask for attention. It doesn't demand answers. It just sits there. Quiet. Persistent. A sense that something in your life is slightly misaligned. Not enough to break things. Just enough to make everything feel heavier than it should. You don't talk about it. Because you don't have the language for it. You start wondering if this is just how life feels now. If this dull weight is simply the cost of growing up. Of being responsible. Of being realistic. You watch others move forward. Some faster. Some louder. Some more certain. And you don't feel jealous. You feel behind. But not in time. In clarity. Here's the truth most people never hear. This feeling is not weakness. It's not failure. It's not a flaw in you. It's what happens when you live too long without direction. When your actions keep moving. But your inner compass hasn't been consulted in a while. The weight you feel is distance. You didn't lose your direction. You didn't miss your chance. You didn't fall apart. You simply stopped protecting the part of you that knew where you were going. And now it's trying to be heard again. This moment isn't here to break you. It's here to tell you something important. Something you've been avoiding. When life starts to feel heavy, most people don't stop. They speed up. They look for things that feel productive. Things that look like movement. Because standing still feels dangerous. When you don't know where you're headed. So you stay busy? Not because you're inspired. But because you're afraid of slowing down. Busyness becomes protection. It keeps questions away. It fills silence before it can speak. You take on more responsibility. More tasks. More noise. And from the outside, it looks like progress. You're doing more. Learning more. Pushing forward. But inside, nothing has shifted. This is where distraction becomes convincing. You tell yourself you're improving. You're optimizing. Preparing. Getting ready for something. But ready for what? When direction is unclear, any movement can feel like the right one. Even if it's sideways. Even if it's in circles. Technology makes this easier. Endless information. Endless advice. Endless comparison. You consume instead of create. You plan instead of act. You scroll instead of reflect. Not because you're lazy, but because distraction is easier than sitting with uncertainty. Here's the quiet truth. Staying busy can be a form of avoidance. Not avoidance of work, but avoidance of meaning. You can fill every hour of your day and still feel like you're going nowhere. Because motion without intention doesn't lead anywhere new. So ask yourself this. Not as a challenge, but as an invitation. When was the last time you chose your direction instead of filling your time? When was the last time you slowed down long enough to notice what you actually want? You don't need an answer right now, just the honesty to ask. Awareness doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't interrupt your life. It slips in quietly. Usually when you finally slow down, it comes in moments of stillness, a pause between tasks, a night when you don't reach for distraction, a breath you didn't know you needed, and suddenly you notice something. Not panic, not urgency, clarity. You begin to see the pattern, not with judgment, but with honesty. You notice how long you've been moving, without asking where you're going, how often you've filled time, instead of listening. And for the first time in a while, you don't push the thought away. You let it stay. This is the moment most people fear. They think awareness will hurt, that it will overwhelm them with everything they didn't do or didn't become. But awareness isn't cruel. It doesn't accuse. It explains. It shows you how you adapted, how you coped, how you survived. And suddenly, the drift makes sense. You realize something important here. Drifting was not a mistake. It was a response to pressure, to expectation, to exhaustion. You didn't stop caring. You protected yourself. The only way you knew how. By going numb. By going automatic. By going quiet. And with that realization, the shame starts to loosen. You stop blaming yourself for not having everything figured out. You stop measuring your life against versions of yourself that didn't know what was coming. You begin to see that nothing is broken, nothing is ruined, nothing is too late. Awareness doesn't demand action. It doesn't rush you. It simply asks you to be honest, to notice what feels empty, to notice what still matters, to notice what you've been avoiding, not to fix it, just to see it. That alone is movement. This is the quiet turning point. Not the moment you change everything, but the moment you stop running from what you already know. You don't need answers yet. You don't need a plan. You only need to stay present long enough to hear yourself again. Most people don't drift because they're careless. They drift because they're trying to survive. Because at some point, life becomes louder than their inner voice. Expectations pile up. Responsibilities multiply. Pressure arrives before clarity does. And slowly, attention shifts from meaning to maintenance. You start focusing on what's urgent, what needs to be handled, what can't be ignored. Bills, deadlines, other people's needs. There's nothing wrong with this. It's normal. But when urgency becomes permanent, direction quietly disappears. Not because you chose it, but because you didn't have space to choose anything else. Another reason people drift is fear. Not obvious fear, not panic, but the quiet kind. Fear of choosing wrong, fear of committing to something that might not work out. So instead of choosing, you delay, you stay flexible, you stay open, and without realizing it, you stay nowhere. Comparison plays its part too. You see people who seem ahead, more certain, more successful, and instead of inspiration, it creates hesitation. You question your timing, your ability, your place. So you wait. Not because you're lazy, but because you don't want to make the wrong move. Drifting is often a sign that you've been carrying too much for too long, that you've adapted to uncertainty by minimizing risk, that you chose stability over alignment, and that choice made sense at the time. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Erase what matters most. Drifting doesn't mean you failed. It means you adjust. It means you kept going when clarity wasn't available. It means you survived without a map. And now, you're aware again. That awareness is not an accident, it's an invitation. Returning doesn't mean rushing. It doesn't mean fixing everything. It doesn't mean becoming someone new overnight. Returning simply means not drifting anymore. It means noticing where you are, without judging how you got here. You don't need to erase the distance. You just need to stop increasing it. You don't need clarity all at once. You don't need a 5-year plan. You don't need certainty. You only need one honest moment. One moment where you choose presence over distraction. One moment where you listen instead of filling the silence. That moment is enough to begin. The direction you return to isn't something new. It's something familiar. Something you once cared about. Something that made time feel slower. Something that didn't need to impress anyone. You don't have to commit to it yet. You just have to remember it. You are not late. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are aware. And awareness changes how time works. It turns waiting into preparation. It turns drifting into choice. It turns this moment into a beginning. If you needed a sign to slow down, this is it. If you needed permission to pause, you already have it. You don't need to rush forward. You just need to stay here long enough to feel where you're meant to go next.